Well, anyway, shalom, everyone. Welcome. It's Wednesday night again. Back after I was here last week, wasn't I? I'm beginning to wonder what week it is. But anyway, we're in the middle of January. And what I like to tell people now is that it's getting colder down here. And I kind of miss being in Indiana where it's snowing and colder. But I really don't. So I just thought I'd say that. Well, anyway, let's get started. We're going to talk about Ezekiel. And we're going to talk about, well, we're going to eventually, as we go through this, we're going to be seeing the COVID or the Kavod, excuse me, the Kavod, which is Ezekiel's vision of what the divine looks like. Now, I picked doing this one again. A few years ago, I did it for friends, and I thought I did a good job. But my friends, if they've looked at my past lesson, they'll notice that it's not anywhere close to being like what this one is. But I did do this because we just finished Zechariah, and Zechariah is only 14 chapters, but it's almost like, well, it almost took us a year. But now I want to share what I think is the companion prophet, Ezekiel. Now, for those who do not study Hebrew, I inserted the word kavod into the title. Kavod is the Hebrew word that means glory or honor, and it comes from the root that signifies weight or heaviness. So in biblical context, it often refers to the importance or the majesty of God. And so that's what we're going to be talking about as we go through this book also. Now, when I did it the last time, I viewed these chapters, and especially this first one, I saw it two different ways. Now that I've gone through it a third time or a second time, I now find myself saying, well, there's at least three ways that I can look at this. Obviously, the first way is it's a prophetic vision. Secondly, it's Kabbalistic meditation. In that case, this whole thing would be known as Ma'aseh Mekerva, which is the work of the chariot. But on a deeper level, in a Hebrew study, Ezekiel doesn't just see the divine, he is acted upon by what he sees. Now, as we go through this, I want to try to teach you how to really look at this character. I didn't choose Ezekiel by accident because Zechariah deals with cosmic repair of this world, while Ezekiel deals with cosmic structure. So Zechariah trains your vision, while Ezekiel trains your inner mind or your inner posture. And it will, if done well, require you to slow down and focus. So my suggestion, if you're really going to study this, and I can send you my notes if you need my notes, I really think you need to do several things. In fact, I wrote them down just so I remember them. I want you to think about reading the text slowly and work on only one of the portions of a vision at a time. Don't decode your thinking immediately. I want you to just sit for a minute and look at the images in your mind. First there, and then reflect. And notice your bodily responses as you'll probably be confused at times or in awe at times and some sense of resistance to what you're actually seeing or thinking about. Ask alignment questions as you're going through this. Not interpretive, but I want you to think, where am I in this whole picture? What faculty is being addressed? Now understand, Ezekiel is not meant to be consumed. It's been set, or it's meant to be settled, to rearrange thinking quietly, dependent upon circumstances and surfaces that you're looking at. Tradition would say that if it doesn't require time, well, it's hardly worth reading and receiving. So as we begin our study of Ezekiel 1, And later we're going to talk about similar things in the third chapter. You should understand that this chapter is read as the Haftorah on the first day of the festival of Shavuot, or Pentecost, if you have to, which commemorates the giving of the Torah. Now, the book of Ezekiel was, well, compiled. Understand it was compiled from the writings of Ezekiel's students. Ezekiel did not write much of what we're going to read. His students did, which is not uncommon. It is a common process. I remember Jeremiah had a scribe who went with him, who did all of that, Baruch. And the same thing holds true here. Now, it was also finished, or part of it was done, by the sages of the Great Assembly. Now we can see this this more easily when we examine just these first few verses. Now in verse 1, when you read it, what you're going to see is it says it happened in the 30th year, in the third month, fourth month, on the 5th of the month, as I, first person, was among the exiles. But notice it all was in the third person until he says I. It was written in the first person mostly from the disciples' memories. Ezekiel was declaring the time of his writing, or this writing. In verses 2 and 3, he goes on to say, on the 5th of the month, that's the 5th year of King Jehoiakim, exile, the word of the Lord was revealed to Ezekiel, the son of Buzi, the priest in the land of the Chaldeans, by the river Habar, and the land of the Lord came upon him, or the Lord, or the hand of the Lord came upon him. That would be a lot better. Those verses were written in the third person. And again, they were written by an unknown author, mostly like something that the sages would have said. Now, in verse 4, we return to the first person again, and he begins his explanation of what Hebrew Jewish people would call Ma'aseh Merkavah, the work of the chariot. So the work of the chariot it's a mystical text, and it was written and expounded upon basically back between the 6th and the 11th centuries. Now, it was done probably by the heads of the Talmudic academies in Babylonia, because remember, Babylonia still was a place that was actually active at that point in time. Now it served as a spiritual leaders of they served as the spiritual leaders of the Jewish community. And this era was, well, it's marked by the role of these people interpreting Jewish law and transmitting teachings from the Talmud. Now the opening prophecy in this Bible, or in this book, which came to him while in Babylon, is said to have occurred 5 years after the exile of King Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim was put in exile along with thousands of his leaders, and he was brought to Babylon from Israel. And his exile took place 11 years before the destruction of the temple, according to the way history has written it. Now, we're told Ezekiel went into exile with King Jehoiakim, as well as the sages and the prophets like Daniel, like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You recognize them probably by a different name. But anyway, and Mordecai, along with basically the military leaders and the skilled craftsmen of Judah. It's presumed that Ezekiel began to prophesy prior to leaving the land. Now, there's nothing that explicitly says it, but it's hinted at. So in accordance with the principle that the Shekinah does not rest upon a prophet outside the land unless it first rested upon him in Israel. So in our introduction, we have to note that in verse 3, he had such visions while still in the land, by his use of the phrase, Hayi Haya, there once was. Some hold that Ezekiel's first prophecy, well, in Babylon, is really found not here, but it's really found in the second chapter, or possibly in the 17th chapter. So again, it's not his writing, it's a compilation of his writing, much like Daniel. When we read Daniel, we're actually reading scripts, scrolls that have been put together by the sages and put into a particular order. So as we learned earlier, our story began on the 30th year. Now, the Jewish commentators believe that Ezekiel was dating his prophecies to the 30th year, since that was the year of the Jubilee. Well, in that first year of the Jubilee, Hilkiah, the high priest, was found the missing temple Torah scroll as he was cleaning and repairing the temple under Josiah's orders. Now, according to, by uncovering the scroll, it led to a spiritual revival. King Josiah broke down the high altars and to the foreign gods and established the Torah as Israel's guide. Now, Ezekiel tells us that when he received this prophecy of the departure of the Shekinah from the temple, he was already in exile. We have to remind ourselves or remember, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, we read about the train leaving the temple. That was God on his way out. It was a prophecy predicting that this would happen. It's during Ezekiel's time that it does occur. Now, when we were reading the book of Zechariah, the Shekinah was coming back to become involved, which is why these two books have to be tied together. Now, much of his prophetic mission would be to rebuke the wicked people of his generation for the sins that would lead to the destruction of the temple and their subsequent exile and the exile of the rest of the Jewish people. Now, the true climax to his ministry came in that 25th year after our exile. That would have been in the next Jubilee year, when he had a vision of being taken back to Jerusalem, where he saw every detail of the future temple and prophesied about the final restoration of Israel at the end of days in the order in which King Mashiach, King Messiah, the Kohanim, the Levites, the 12 tribes would dwell there in the land forever. I find it interesting where Israel is now trying to identify how to go about building this third temple. As we get into our story, I think you're going to find that there may be another way that this third temple is going to appear, and not in a physical form like we would be expecting. But that's for later. Now, Ezekiel, when he received this vision, was not by the river Kavar. It actually says El Nahar, which can either mean over it or in it. We also need to note that the Shekinah, or the glory of God, does not rest on a prophet outside the land of Israel unless he is in the place of purity, such as over the water or in the water, which was the case of over the water in the book of Daniel in the 8th chapter. Now, the running water of the river would act like a mikveh, a baptismal. Archaeologists have been unable to locate the river Kavar, and we can't find it on any ancient map. So many believe that he was in or over a channel that led into the Euphrates River. Others simply hold that he was standing at the headwaters of one of the rivers that flowed from Eden. The Hebrew word kavar, which I said means, which I didn't say, it means already, and implies that what Ezekiel saw in his vision existed long before that day. and he probably had seen it previously. Now, the letters in the word kavar are kuf, bet, and resh, and they are the same letters that are used in the word rakav. Rakav, which means vehicle. Kavar is also the root of the word merkava, which is the word for chariot. Now, we should see in the merkava the idea of motion, just as we see the idea of motion in a river. So here in the fourth verse, we are told that the heavens opened and Ezekiel saw Ma'arot. Ma'arot is visions of God. In fact, I read it. It says, and I saw and behold, I Sarah tempest, or the Sarah tempest, was coming from the north, a huge cloud and a flaming fire with the brightness of around it. And from its midst, it was like the color of hashmal, and from the midst of the fire. Now, the terms used here speak of a mystical experience, one at the highest of levels in Kabbalistic understanding. There was a great Kabbalist named Rabbi Moshe de Leon, who was actually the publisher of the book of the Zohar. And it's compared to how the Sephirot, the emotions in a mystical vision, acted much like shining off of a wall after it had passed through a bowl of water. Imagine that. And if the bowl is kept perfectly still, the reflected image is perfectly clear. But the slightest movement of the bowl would cause the water to slosh, and the image breaks up, often oscillating violently. As I've said, or as I've shared on previous lessons, the wind speaks of the Sephirot known as Tefret, balance, or truth. Understand that every part of this vision has a mystical connotation. There are two basic Hebrew words that could be used for this kind of wind. Here, the word is sa'ara, which means an agitating wind, kind that would slosh the bowl. But the other word for this kind of wind is also appropriate. It's sufa. Now, one that is beyond, this sufa is beyond the bounds of natural weather. Sufa might be seen as something which means to annihilate, or actually the root of it means to annihilate. We would think of this kind of wind when describing a tornado or a hurricane. Now we read stormy, but the word sarah speaks of the agitating of the wind, that one enters his mind as he begins to meditate, according to Abarbaral. When you sit down to, or if you sit down to try to meditate, do you find noises coming in your head? Do you find distractions all around you? Sarah. In the physical, we should see this as a real wind, but at the same time is a spiritual, well, it's spiritually about beauty and balance. So when a person meditates, they attempt to reach the point of balance. That's what you're trying to do. God, in this case, the Shekinah, came to destroy Judah, but not completely. God, in this storm, tempered his judgment. Israel, Judah, will go into exile for 40 years after the destruction of the temple. Now we watch the Shekinah leave the temple in Isaiah's story, and the divine presence will not return in that second temple. But he remains absent, or she remains absent, even though Ezra and Nehemiah would rebuild the temple itself and the city walls. But it's not until Zechariah 14 that we witness her at the end of days returning. Now, the same idea holds true for the conscious mind. A clear vision of the Sephirot is in one's mind is only possible if the mind is still and calm. The slightest exterior thought destroys the image completely. So slow down when you look at this and look at these verses differently. Now, the Hebrew word Kabbalah has become the standard term used for referring to this vast array of mystical thought and practices. And it's part of the Jewish tradition. But the popular use of this term, as we shall see, dates back only 800 years. Before that, Judaism's mystical teachings were known by a lot of other names. Like in the Talmud, we can find the name Sitra Torah, which means mysteries of the Torah, or Ta'ameh Torah, which is reasons of the Torah, or Ma'aseh Bereshit, which is workings of the Torah, or Ma'aseh Merkavah. Now, Kabbalah conveys the continuity of a tradition that has been passed down from generation to generation. The first writings on this subject come from the work identified with the patriarch Abraham. They were compiled into a book later, and that book would be known as Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Creation. Now, without a doubt, transmission of mystical knowledge is central to the meaning of the word Kabbalah. But there are numerous other connotations associated with the Hebrew word. Now, the root of the word is kabel. Kabel is found 15 times in our story, and it means to receive. So here in Ezekiel, we find it written multiple times. In fact, the whole Old Testament has it 11 times. The Torah has it 3 times. But anyway, understand, it's about correspondence. It's about receptivity. It's about accepting. It's conveying it. Excuse me. It conveys the essence and purpose of Kabbalistic teachings. Now, this chapter of Ezekiel serves as a foundation for much of Kabbalistic literature, as well as a way of affirming that Ezekiel was in fact a true prophet. Ezekiel's words were not intended originally for anyone. What we're looking at is called esoteric writing. Esoteric refers to the knowledge or the concepts that are intended for or understood by only a small group of people with specialized knowledge, often making them difficult for outsiders to comprehend. It can also describe things that are unusual or of special interest to a limited audience. The esoteric body of Torah is referred to in the Talmud as Ma'aseh Merkavah, the making or the account of the divine chariot. Now, our story should not be construed as a description of a fiery chariot like we read in the book of Kings when we're talking about Elijah leaving. And we can't think of it as being a lunar lander as the NASA scientists began to think. Ma'aseh Merkavah is the most hidden and esoteric part of Judaism. It means literally the story or the work of discipline of the chariot, from the verb rakav, chariot, and the word rakev, to ride. Ezekiel's prophetic ministry began a few years before the destruction of the first temple, and it spanned the period of over 20 years. Ezekiel received his Torah instruction from a prophet, and that prophet was Jeremiah. Now, there's a tradition that Jeremiah was actually his father, and it says he's the son of Buzi, but that's because Jeremiah was so despised by the people for his prophecies. So let's go back. Let's go back to the 4th verse and understand that Ezekiel is not inventing imagery. He's reporting what he sees. This vision, like many others we will read about, are objective prophetic experiences. They're not allegories. Zechariah's visions often collapse time. combined earthly and cosmic realities. And they use symbolic form to express the unexpressible. Ezekiel's choice of words are really grounded in the idea of nuvoah, which is prophecy, not in fantasy. Now we next read in of the Anan Gadol, of a great cloud. Now it speaks of the impending calamity, but even more, it speaks of the Hoshech, the darkness. This darkness hides the presence of God. This cloud caused Ezekiel to be alone with his own thoughts. And now add to this the cloud, the idea of flashing fire inside the cloud. Fire is also the aspect of God known as Gevurah, judgment or might. But the Ish, the fire here, is not the normal idea of fire. We need to understand it was a cleansing fire. Now, the Arizal would say Ezekiel was exposed to the fires of Gehinnom. But notice also that this was the flashing fire. Now, the Hebrew word for flashing, well, it comes from the root lakat, which means to take. So here the idea is that the fire seeks to take away freedom. But it grasps, but it nelakat, grasps or held in place by the burning object. This fire on the surface appears to be speaking of an impending disaster of the temple. Now, we won't get into today, but understand that Ezekiel's first chapter is really a meditative text. Now, we'll touch in it a little bit, but keep it understood. Now, in the Mishnah, in Haggadah 2:1, we are told the account of the chariot may not be taught except to one who is wise and understands his own. Why? Because Ezekiel 1 was written by the scholars as a guide for contemplative ascent, not imagination, but for structured contemplation. Okay, see how it works. Listen, we're going to get a lot of repetition of forms. We're going to get wheels, we're going to get faces, we're going to get fire, we're going to get light. But they're all layered, up and down, in and out, within, around. We're going to get sounds like rushing water, sounds like wings. And we're going to also get the idea of imagery because we're going to talk about the firmament and we're going to talk about thrones. Now, this is intentional. The text is designed to first quiet the rational mind and to allow it to engage a symbolic mind and open to contemplative heart. Now, in later tradition, the Helikot, the palace, which is better known as the temple, becomes the map of consciousness. In fact, that's the last 8 chapters of the book. It's a pathway of ascent. It is intended to align our world below with that which is above. Ezekiel is meant to be a meditated book. But there's one layer or one more layer that we need to discuss. Ezekiel is a initiator text in that it was meant to be transformational. It was not about just simply insight. This is the sod layer of Ezekiel. It explains why Ezekiel feels differently or feels different from the more often read Isaiah and Jeremiah. I find myself drawn to Ezekiel more than I do the other two. Ezekiel doesn't just see the divine, he has acted upon it or acted upon by it. And he will be lifted and set down and bound, and he will be muted, and he will be forced to eat a scroll. And he will personally become a sign to Israel. And he will experience death and resurrection, or at least the imagery of such in the dry bones story. Ezekiel is he's a participant. not simply a observer of what's going on. Ezekiel sees the divine presence, the Kavod Hashem, approaching from exile, carried by a living chariot throne. And we're not looking at God's essence, but an idea. Some would call it a metaphor. But he sees how the infinite chooses to appear within creation. Notice the verse again. A storm wind came from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing continually, and the brightness around it. Now, this is not a random weather report. What we are looking at is motion and energy. Can't help but go back to thinking about what I've learned about how the world is made up of motion. It's made up of vibrations. It's made up of energy. That's what we're trying to get across in this point. The divine presence is moving toward him, not the other way around. Now, the idea of the north in Tanakh is often signals the idea of judgment or power or the unknown. And the account begins with overwhelming force, not intimacy. From its midst, it was like the color of hashmal from the midst of the fire. Well, fire within fire, with light flowing, floating, or folding inward. This tells us immediately that we are not looking at physical objects, but at layers of intensity. This is the visual language of holiness under restraint. I want to take some time and look at the word hashmal, because hashmal is an interesting word. Some will see this word representing the idea of amber, because the word in Hebrew, hashmal, can also be used for amber. Now, it is used only 3 times in the Old Testament, and all of them are going to be in this book, all giving a definitive description of what Ezekiel saw at the center of this manifestation of God. Now, the Septuagint, which is a Greek writing, renders hashmal in the Greek as electrum. So this is where we get the words electron and electricity. Hashmal is also about electricity. Now, thousands of years before mankind knew what an electron or electricity were, Ezekiel would use it to describe what he saw. Hashmal is a compound word, and when you look at it, it means hash means silence, and mal is malel, which is a loud sound. So we're looking at a quiet, soft sound and a loud sound. Have you ever stood near a power line and heard the electricity moving along it? Not in it, but along the wire? Well, in the Talmud, Haggadah 13b, there's the mystery of a prayer. For one to connect to the hashmal, the electricity of God, one must first, he must be silent, hash, to cut away mal, the constant noise. What you're cutting away is called klipot. It is then that you can cease, or you can speak to God with your heart, and with your heart you'll hear his voice, and with your heart you will actually see his wisdom or his wonders. Now, I shared in other classes that klipot means a shell. It was Rabbi Yaakov Yofas who characterized klipot as being distracting thoughts during prayer. So during prayer, these klipot really contain actually divine sparks waiting to be redeemed and elevated. They're broken down by the silence, releasing the divine presence or the Shekinah. Put into similar words, what the Talmud is teaching is that in silence before God, this silence will crack the shell that is distracting our thoughts. And it releases the presence of God or the Shekinah in us. And when that is done, we will begin to speak our prayers from our heart, not our mouth. Now, we live in a very hurried and noisy culture. We often, or we want everything now, and well, we're really quite boisterous about that. We don't want to wait. Now, this spills over into our relationship with God, and our understanding is hurried, boisterous, if you will, with God as we go to prayer. Sometimes we just go too demanding, looking for things or waiting for something to happen. Now, the next section is a larger section. In fact, it's verses 5 to 14. And I want to read it all together because it, well, hopefully it'll make sense after. And from its midst was the likeness of four living beings. And this is their appearance. They had their likeness of a man, and each one had four faces, and each one had four wings, and their legs were straight legs, and the soles of their feet were like round foot, and they sparkled like the glory of burnished copper. Now the human hands were beneath their wings and on their four sides, and their faces and their wings were like, well, to all for them, they were the same for all of them. Their wings joined one to the other. They did not turn when they walked. Each one would go towards the direction of his face. And the likeness of their faces was the face of a man, the face of a lion, and the face of the lion was on the right side, and then the other four faces, the face of the ox was on the left side, and then the other face of the eagle was on the back side. And so were the faces. And the wings were extended upward. Each one had two wings joined to each other, and two covering their bodies. Now each one would go toward the direction of his face. Wherever would be the will to go, they would go. They did not turn to as they walked, and they likened of the living beings, their appearance was of fiery coals, burning like the appearance of firebrands, and it was going among the living beings, and there was brightness to their fire, and from the fire came forth lightning, and the living beings would run and return like the appearance of the sparks. From within it came the likeness of the four living creatures. The creatures were called the Hayot. Now, we understand they are alive, that they were intelligent, and that they're unified. Now, these unusual beings had four faces, which we talked about, four wings, straight legs, meaning that they had no knee joints, and the feet were like the calves' feet. They are not animals. They are archetypical forces of life. In simplest terms, they represented animated creations, facing in all directions at once. So nothing is outside of their awareness. So they moved in perfect coordination, no hesitation, no deviation, only total alignment. Creation here is shown as obedient, integrated, and purposeful. So when it says, and fire went up and down among the living creatures, the fire wasn't outside them. It moves within and between them. This is meant to show how life is animated by divine energy. The divine does not crush life, it flows through it. And I saw an ophon, a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures. Now he saw an ephonim, which is plural. It's a wheel within a wheel with eyes all around, and they moved without turning. Now, this is often misunderstood, as you can understand. At the simplest level, the wheels represented movement. Movement when and how? Through time, through space, without losing their orientation. Nothing drifts and nothing escapes their notice. Now we learn that there was one spirit in all of them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the midst of the wheels. So this is crucial. The hayot, the wheels, the fire, all are inside one spirit. This is seen as the unity, and unity without collapse, without multiplicity, without fragmentation. Our Bible begins with the letter bet, two. We will find that the whole Bible deals with more than one. But this is all about oneness, togetherness. Now, next we read, over the heads of the living creatures was something like a firmament, like awesome crystal. Now we're speaking about a boundary, not a separation, but it separates created forces below from the divine rule above, which is much like the second day the second day of the creation story. Water above was separated from the water below. Next, we read of over the heads of the living creatures. Well, I just did that, didn't I? And above the firmament, the likeness of a throne, like sapphire stone. Now, structure becomes meaning. The idea of a throne speaks of authority. It speaks of kingship. It speaks of governance. This is not chaos, but it's ordered sovereignty. So on this throne is a human-like figure. Now, Ezekiel is extremely cautious in mentioning the likeness of the being sitting on the throne. He is not saying, and say it again, he is not saying God has a body. He is saying that the divine chooses to relate in a form that we can understand. Next, like the appearance of a bow that is in the cloud on a rainy day. Obviously, this is a rainbow, and we know that the rainbow speaks of mercy. It speaks of God's covenant. It speaks of a promise of restraint during judgment. The vision ends not with terror, but dealing with a relationship. Ezekiel tells us what he thinks he saw. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Hashem. Now understand, Ezekiel is not meant to be consumed or understand on the simplistic level. It's meant to settle in. It's meant to rearrange things quietly beneath the surface within us. Tradition would say that if it doesn't require time to process, it is hardly worth receiving. Now he tells us that what he thinks he saw, because he says this was the appearance of the likeness of the Kavod, glory of Hashem. This is not God, but God's glory as it appears within creation. Why does this matter? Well, Ezekiel is in exile. The temple is far away, and Israel thinks God is absent, gone. Well, anything Ezekiel sees, his throne being mobile, his presence not being confined, and God has followed his people. He's followed them to Babylon. That is the core message that he's trying to get across. One last thought. If you had to say, well, I had to say it in one line, it might go like this. Ezekiel sees the divine presence structured, alive, mobile, and rational. And it's approaching humanity from within creation itself. Now, the key to understand Ezekiel is not seeing things, but functions. Each image does something. Let me walk you through the major images one more time, one at a time. So let's start with the storm, wind, and the fire. Now he sees the violent storm, the cloud, the flashing fire, the radiance. Now this image speaks of divine energy entering into what we can perceive or see. I would take you to the book or to Exodus and the Sinai. All of the events talk about storms and fires and clouds. A storm is the power that cannot be controlled. Fire is transformational. And in this case, it doesn't consume. And a cloud conceals. So the presence that is there can't be seen directly. So why does it appear this way? Before structure, there is an overwhelming force. Now, the human mind can't receive revelations gently at first. They always arrive with intensity. The best examples is well, what I like to think of as the Mount Sinai experience and the giving of the commandments, how the people were totally overwhelmed. Now, in the second set of drawings, we have the four living creatures, the Hayot. Now, he sees four beings, human-like in form, each with one with four faces and four wings. Now, they represent life itself as God brings to life. They are not angels, well, at least not angels as we would popularly think of them. They are the deepest living forces of creation. The first face was a human face, and that deals with consciousness and self-awareness. The second face is a lion, and that deals with strength or sovereignty. The third face is endurance or service. The fourth is the eagle, and it deals with transcendence or vision. Now, together they represent life that can act, endure, rule, perceive all at once. Nothing is missing, nothing dominates. Now, their movement, well, it's obviously strange, but it's straight, and there's no turning. So he sees that they move forward without turning or wavering. So what does it mean? My best understanding is it's perfect alignment with the divine will. There's no inner conflict, no hesitation, no ego. This is a picture of a world before it fractured, our world before Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Now the wings of the Hayot, well, he sees two wings covering two wings and two wings extended. So what does that mean? Well, the wings provided covering. Covering, it speaks of humility and concealment. And it's about extending action and outreach. This is the rhythm. It's the rhythm of holiness. Nothing holy is fully exposed, yet nothing holy is inert. Fire moving among them. He sees fire traveling between the beings. So what does that mean? Well, the divine does not sit above life only. He moves within it. This is the crucial idea. God is not distant. He functions from within this world and within us. This fire is, for a lack of a better term, conscious vitality. It's not about destruction. Theophanim, the wheels, well, he sees wheels beside each creature, a wheel within a wheel and eyes all around. This is often misunderstood. So let me try to give you a better or a simpler answer. The wheels represent movement through reality. And reality is time, it's space, it's history. So they speak of cause and effect. The idea that the wheel within the wheel is intended to speak of movement through multiple dimensions at once. Once the eyes are all around, tell us that nothing is random, nothing is unseen, nothing escapes his awareness. This is divine providence in motion. These things are connected, identifying this as one spirit in all of them. The same spirit animates both the creatures and the wheels. So what does it mean? Multiplicity does not mean separation. Certainly there are many forms, but one animating will, the mystics call it the will with, or call it unity without sameness. Now next was the firmament or the crystal expanse. Now he sees a transparent, awe-inspiring barrier above these beings. It seems to be a boundary but it allows relationships without collapsing. It separates created forces. It's the divine governance. It's the clear, not opaque. It teaches us that God transcends creation, yet remains visible through it. Now, the throne he sees, the sapphire-like throne that Moses and the 70 saw at Mount Sinai, according to Ezekiel chapter 24, verse 10. It obviously speaks of order, it speaks of authority, and it speaks of kingship. God orchestrates from his throne. This is not chaotic energy, but it's directed rule. Reality is covered, but it's not arbitrary. Okay, next, the human-like form. Here we see a radiant figure with human appearance, fire above and below. So what does that mean? Well, God reveals himself in a relational form. Human-like indicates he is recognizable, but he's also not limited to a human body. In fact, he has no limitations at all. God chooses to be encountered in a way humans could respond to it. Now, the final part was the rainbow. Now, he sees the covenantal glow surrounding this whole vision. Mercy encircles power. Judgment is restrained and the relationship is preserved. This vision is not about fear, it's about trust. Now, let me try to put this description all together into a simpler picture. Ezekiel sees a living, ordered, aware, mobile, divine presence that's governing creation from within and above and moving towards humanity in exile. And it's clothed in mercy, or he's clothed in mercy. And that's why this vision matters. One final thought. This is not symbolism that you're going to be decoding. It's a structure that we are going to have to begin to recognize. For everyone, this chapter is meant to be read slowly and reflected on. The images are meant to be reordered. Uh, reordered and reordered in your world. Restore trust in the divine presence, even while you're in exile. Now, when you're ready, the natural next step is to understand the four creatures. Why is the first one on top, the human? Well, why the Merkava? Why the chariot? Why is there mobility? As you begin to go through these, you're going to find a lot of things. You're also going to be looking at a mobile and not fixed temple. What we've just looked at is important. Let the images stand without forcing conclusions. Now, you need to allow meaning to come after seeing each object. That's the posture of Ezekiel himself and the model that he's created. He repeatedly falls silent before he speaks. He takes his time to reflect. Or a simple sit with a single verse and let that verse open up to you. Now, when we return, we can generally connect, or as we return next time, we can connect Ezekiel to Zechariah, and Ezekiel and Zechariah to the Shekinah, the one that's in exile, and the one that will be coming out of exile. But that's for the next time. This was a long prep story, but hopefully you have time to think about it and reflect on it and read each section slowly. I hope you have a great night. Happy Thursday. Don't forget to show up Thursday morning and join us for Rod's Thursday morning Parsha class. So we thank you and we say good night.